do I really think I'm a bad person? And it's like I had to look through things, and yeah, I've done some bad things. I've done some things that I'm not proud of, but I'm not a bad person. And let's say, even if I would put the bad things that I did at the high end was 5% of my life, does that 5% of my life negate the 95% that I would say that I'm just a fine person or even a good person?
I'm,
Oh my fucking God. If only you could have seen what's just happened a second ago. Do it again, Sam.
I said going live. In fact, we're not going live. We're recording in three,
Right.
2, 1, and then I hit the button.
Oh,
Here we
dear
are.
me. Got to get myself a new partner, aren't I?
Go for it.
Anyway, on that bombshell. I'm only kidding, Sam. I know you get all upset when I talk about my other business partner, so I won't talk about replacing you, do I? Get all upset. Right. We're a threesome today.
Yeah.
We have the lovely RJ with us. Hello, RJ. That's bad timing.
Hey, Sam.
Took a
Hey,
sip
Ellie.
there.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Bad timing. Well, it's good time. I'm really glad that you're here. So, RJ, you guys would likely know RJ from a few episodes ago where we came back from Tampa. RJ was my man for parenting tips. In fact, I've had two great parenting tips now from RJ. The first one was, instead of stressing yourself about where to buy your souvenirs when you visit places, just get them on Amazon on the way back, which is top tip number one. And top tip number two was, if your kids want a pet and you don't want a pet, you take them to a cafe where they can pet cats or dogs or whatever, and then you leave the animal there, take the children home. Fabulous.
That sounds very logical to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you only, instead of, paying, what is it? I think it's $50 here for a cat. And then, you have all the food and everything like that. You just go for 30 minutes, get all the pet and none of the hassle. That's what it is.
There you go.
That's the tagline for the place. All of the pets, all of the hassle.
That's right.
So I'm thrilled. Thank you for being with us today, RJ. I'm thrilled to get to spend some time with you to talk more parenting tips, and also a big topic of, did you say you wanted to talk about self-hatred today?
Oh, yeah.
It's only because you want to make me cry again, isn't it?
It's been a topic that has seemed to hit a lot of people in the hearts, and so that's why I keep talking about it. And it's a part of my story that when I used to talk about it, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Like I would come to it, and then people would always come back and ask me questions. So I realized just how much people resonate with that, and I've been able to kind of walk people through coming to terms with the fact that maybe they do not like themselves, if they don't want to use self-hatred, but they don't like themselves and they're punishing themselves. And so what can they do to really start building that friendship? Because for me, it wasn't rebuilding, it was building. There was no previous relationship with myself where I actually liked who I was. So
It's going to be a tearjerker, I'm sure.
Well, that sounds like a cool opportunity to just kind of say, what, give us the kind of your story. What makes sense as a lead in, so that people get to know a bit about you and weave into it. If that topic comes up, then great. But yeah, go over to you, man. Just share away.
Okay, so my name's RJ Zimmerman. I'm a father of two. Let's see here. I haven't drank in over 10 years now, and I didn't. So stopping drinking was not the most important decision that I made. I'm a former high voltage line tech as well, so I worked on high voltage power lines. But growing up, I grew up in Wisconsin in the United States, and Wisconsin is by far the most alcohol consumed as a state. They do a study every single year, 50 drunkest counties in the United States, and Wisconsin's never had less than 40. They generally hang around 43 out of 50 counties in one state. My county I grew up in is on that list, and there's more cows than people in that county, but somehow, one of the drunkest counties in the United States. So when you put it in that context, it's no surprise that I drank the way that I drank. And the way that I drank was, I didn't drink often, but when I did, I drank all of it. And that was okay. Going to college, that was okay. Post college for a little bit, but I found myself at a place where I was stuck in my life. And the last night that I drank, I was supposed to go visit my girlfriend, and well, not visit, but go to an event with her or something. And I texted her and I said, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it. And she's like, it's okay, I didn't plan on you being there anyway. And I was like, oof, okay, I get it. Yep, this is par for the course for me. And I was so hungover that I couldn't keep anything down till 2, 3 a.m. the next morning. I couldn't even keep water down. So I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, okay, I have two decisions. I can continue going where I am, or I can start a family, start the career that I want to start, move into really moving my life forward. And if I want to, alcohol can't be a part of that. And I decided that I was going to start a career and look to start a family. And luckily I'm a stubborn asshole. And so that was what carried me forward. And I didn't do any program. I didn't do any steps or anything. I just stopped drinking. 6 years after I had stopped drinking, 2 kids, married. I've just got promoted at my job. So I was a foreman for a line tech just after a year of making journeyman, which is pretty, like, when I look back, it's like, okay, that is pretty impressive. But we're sitting in the truck and it's raining, and we had just driven around so that the kids would fall asleep because we had 2 kids under 2. And my wife turns to me and she says, I want a divorce. And so I go and I look in the mirror and I see that same void that I had seen when I made the decision to stop drinking. And it was like, okay, I can continue to go the route that I'm going and just not know what this void is and take things and just shove it in and hope that things will work out. Or I could do something different and go to therapy and try to figure out just what this void is so that I could take care of it. So that starts me down my path of therapy, getting diagnosed with ADHD at 33, really trying to figure out who I am. And then through that, I started a podcast called Untapped Keg. And the podcast is really what launched me forward in this healing and growing journey. And hearing and talking to other people who have really done the work to heal and grow, learning like the mental health side, not just the not drinking, the sober, the, alcohol free side, but really learning that internal world and taking things that people have learned about themselves that they don't really talk about and trying them on for myself. A little bit later, moved across the country for a better culture to raise my kids in. And I recorded the podcast. And when I recorded the podcast, my kids were, my ex-wife took the kids out so that I could have the house free. And they come running inside and they yell, Daddy, I love you. And I was having a low mental health day. And because I'd been doing all this self-work, I hear this really small voice say, how could you love such a piece of shit? And I realized I was holding it against my kids that they love their dad. And that was when I looked in the mirror and I realized that I hated myself. And the way that I had been operating my entire life was from a place of hating myself. All of these decisions that I've made that have been self-sabotage have been, friends that have been really difficult to, get reciprocal energy from, let alone relationships, things like that. It's been from a place of really deep self-hatred. And when I looked in the mirror, I actually had a physical reaction where I was pulling away from the mirror, looking at myself. I was like, okay, I don't know what to do at this point. I know that is a problem. I can't hold it against my kids that they love their dad. Like, what? And I was like, okay, I can't just go to, hey, RJ, I love you. You're doing such an amazing job. Like, look at what you've done in your life. You've really built things multiple times from places of, having everything kind of burned down around you. You're such a great person. It's like, no, that wasn't going to work. It didn't feel right at all. And if honestly saying it now, it doesn't feel terrible. But okay, what can I do to just get to a place where that's not the focus? And I was like, could I say that I'm okay? Just look in the mirror, look at myself, shrug and say, you're okay. You're okay. It's like, yeah, I could say that. And so I started, every single time I'd look in the mirror, I'd be like, oh, I'm okay. Every single time I heard that critic really start to go into me, just lay in and just relive a lot of my mistakes, it's like, I'm okay. And just getting to that place of really neutral, of not necessarily good, not bad, but just neutral. Um, that that was really powerful. And that really started me down the path of sharing that story and trying to figure out a way to be able to help people forward with that. And that led me to This Naked Mind, which was the This Naked Mind Institute, was um, my first contact with This Naked Mind. I hadn't really seen or done anything with it before. And everything that they talked about was, compassion first, talking about the feelings underneath why you wanted to drink, talking about everything that they talk about, the science backed stuff. I'm like, this is very much what I agree with and how I view, um, not drinking, or, as Laura McCowan calls it, ritualized comfort seeking. And instead of addiction, because addiction is just, that's the band-aid that people have put on it just because they don't want to understand it, because it's difficult, right? And so the more that you start to realize that, addiction isn't the cause, like it's the symptom of other things. And as Gabor Mate says, what's the pain? Like that is really what I have gravitated towards. And so I went through the This Naked Mind Institute, and I'm coaching in the path, but that's pretty much the abbreviated version of what gets me to here.
You and I had a bit of an exchange because you shared the reel with me from your Instagram, and it's so hard. Like this, I think I said to you, it kind of hit me in the heart, and it took me back to a place of having two very small beings, when this is when I was still drinking and I was suffering postnatally, and really kind of it's like I wanted help, but I didn't want to admit that I needed help, and I was kind of skeptical about the help that might be available to me. But I became so desperate that I'd gone back to, and I was kind of fearful that my GP would try and prescribe me antidepressants, which I'd had a bad experience with them before. So I had all this like stuff built up that was preventing me from asking for help. And then I was so just so lost. And so at the end of it all, that I went there, the two kids playing at my feet, and I just completely broke down. And the feeling, the overriding feeling at the time sitting in that doctor's office was looking at these two kids, these two little innocent kids playing at my feet. They would be better off without me. Like what a thing to think as a mum. And yeah, it was very, very present and very real and intense and extremely painful. And I think that distortion that we have, that, it's not an overnight thing, but it's so important to be able to zoom out and take a different perspective. And so what you talked about a level of neutrality is a really great first step, because like you, if I'd have tried to tell myself, you're doing a great job here, and, really love you, Ellie, like I mean, even telling myself that I'm okay, I think that would have been a push at that time, because I felt very, very far from okay. And as we know, all of this work, as you say, it's not about addiction. It's about this real, very real disconnection from self, or the illusion of disconnection from self, because actually we can't be disconnected from self, but it's that sense of separation, and it's incredibly painful, and everybody will have their own experience of it. And the work that we're all steeped in is, the way that I like to describe it is the recovery of self. And that's why I love the word recovery, because it's this adventure back to yourself. So I love the intro that you gave to that, and you know, your first kind of steps on the path of it, because it's so tender, and it's so like that infighting in your own head, you know. And this is why I think, you know, it's no surprise we've all been drawn to this Naked Mind, because it is, as you say, it's a compassion based approach. In the first instance, it's all about awareness, because without that, you have nothing. You can't do anything. You can't change anything.
And something that I've noticed is that awareness piece, a lot of us have it. It's just pointed at the wrong things, right? It's pointed at your mistakes. It's pointed at what's wrong with you. It's pointed at the things that are keeping you really in that hole that you're in. And so it's taking that awareness and then shifting it to a place where it actually is helping you. Because what is that awareness really doing? You're pointing at your mistakes, so you don't make them again. Like you're bringing light to them. But when that's all you're focused on, you start to really believe, like I know I did for myself, that you're a bad person. Like I had to, in order to get to the okay, I had to weigh, do I really think I'm a bad person? And it's like I had to look through things, and yeah, I've done some bad things. I've done some things that I'm not proud of, but I'm not a bad person. And let's say, even if I would put the bad things that I did at the high end was 5% of my life, does that 5% of my life negate the 95% that I would say that I'm just a fine person or even a good person? Like, no. And so when I realized that, even if you can just say, well, I'm not a bad person, there's something that you can start with. Like, I'm not a bad person. And that's a place that you could really start with that as well. And that's, your story really touches on things, Ellie, because like as a high voltage line tech, it crossed my mind more than once that if I just touched these two wires, my kids would be taken care of financially for the life. And that was multiple times. Like I would have to make it look like an accident. I could do that. And they would be better off. Right. And I had those thoughts for real. And it's like, it didn't scare me. That's the thing. It didn't scare me having those thoughts. It was just, I saw a really, really good friend of mine, one of my best friends growing up. His dad passed away when we were in fifth grade, I think. Maybe it was sixth grade. And I saw what he went through. And that's what stopped me, right? That's what, but those thoughts were absolutely real. And a lot of times I think we don't want to admit that, because then we think there's something really deeply wrong with us. But it, you know, if people haven't gone through life and been like, it's at a certain point, like they just want the pain, the fighting, that whatever it is in your head to end, like I commend them. But it's almost time to start normalizing having that. And yeah, you didn't act on it, and that's okay, because then when people have it, okay, I'm not so weird, I'm not so, broken and wrong. And so much of this is, how much does that lead people, like there's just no fixing me. Normal people don't have these thoughts. What if normal people, quote unquote normal, what is normal, but what if normal people really do have those thoughts at some point in their life? When we start normalizing that, people don't feel so, ostracized and pushed to the side when that happens.
Yeah. So if there's anyone listening to this and they're like, I hear myself in, in RJ's story or Ellie's story, you've touched on this around where to start, just around, really just reflecting on it. Like, am I a bad person? But what else would you love those people to know? And what sort of, I don't like the word advice, but what kind of like heartfelt suggestions do you have for someone that finds themselves in that position?
It's, it's one of those things where trying on words that will seem to fit, and that's how you talk to yourself, right? Whether it's, a lot of people say, talk to yourself the way that you talk to a friend. And it's like, that's awesome. But for me, it just didn't work because like there was a kind and a caring for friends, for people who weren't me, people I cared about, that I didn't care about myself. And a lot of that showed up where like how I would sacrifice myself for everybody else. Like I would put myself in the hard situations, not because I knew I could do it, but because I didn't want anybody else to be in that hard situation. I didn't want them to feel that. So with that, for me, it really is taking some of those really harsh criticisms that come in your mind and just asking yourself if it's actually true, right? And if it's true, okay, what is true in it? Is the entire thing true, or is there a true piece that makes it true? And then sometimes, okay, is it the most true? Because we can make things true that aren't necessarily, that like are 1% true. And that's something that when you look at, okay, yeah, that's true. That one time that happened. One time. That's it. That doesn't make it a rule. That doesn't make it, but putting yourself in position to be around people who really care about you really is really helpful too. And it's not necessarily hearing the praise. It's not necessarily just, it's the absence of criticism that is, I think for me, when I started to put myself around people that cared about me, the criticism that was there was just, it just wasn't. And so when you just stop hearing that criticism, it allows you to have a different internal dialogue than when you hear criticism, and it just reinforces that inner critic the way that it is. So if you can find spaces where you can just not get feedback that is criticism, right? And the feedback that you get is more supportive, that can help you to change what's going on in your mind as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and maybe I'd love to know how it looks to you, that, and I think this is often the case with transformation. It's like one of the first steps is like we're kind of trying on the words, and there's an element of effort there. But then at some point it switches from effort to understanding, and we have a realization. It becomes real for us. We realize that, oh, I'm not actually who I think I am. It's so there's this profound shift that seems to happen when someone shifts from an identity of I am depressed or I am this or whatever to a moment of, oh, that's not who I am. That's just the light I've been shining on my thinking, and I've identified with that as me. So when was that point for you where you went, holy fucking shit, like actually that's not me, I'm more than that, like, and you kind of like connected with that deeper sense of awareness, that deeper sense of self?
So I started asking myself, especially after I recognized that I was holding against my kids that they love their dad. I started asking myself, what if I'm wrong? Like I looked at all of these moments. Okay, I have all of these friends. Like I do have these friends that care about me. Like they care about me. What if I'm wrong about not caring about myself? Right? What, I don't love me. My kids love me. What if I'm wrong in holding it against them that they love me? And looking at the times that, I'm still married at this point. So, okay, she cared about me. She wanted to get married to me. She loved me. What if I'm wrong about that? Like that people shouldn't love me, that I don't deserve good things. What if I'm wrong? And so that what if I'm wrong piece has really led me to a space of looking at how I'm showing up and giving myself credit for how I show up and not necessarily an outcome, and being honest. And so a moment that the transformation really happened, that I really started to talk to myself in a way that was a lot more kind. It was so much more kind. It was actually a moment that I shared with my kid, again, my oldest, who was 4 at the time. And My ex-wife and I had just separated, just moved to different houses, and I was dropping him off um, at his daycare, and he didn't want to go in. And I'd been working on myself, for 2 years at that point, and I just really started to let my feelings and emotions in again. Like that was something that I completely turned off for so many years. And he was fighting me to go into class, and he never does that. Usually it's his younger brother, and his younger brother walks in, but my oldest was just having a rough day. And so I walk into his class and I'm, okay, what's going on? Like there's something that you're not telling me that um that is going on this morning. And he finally looked up, he said, I'm gonna miss you. I don't want you to go. And I was like, oh, I know what this is, right? And so I picked him up and we walked into the hallway and we sat down, and he started crying and I started crying with him. And we just sat there for 4 or 5 minutes crying together in the hallway. And then he stood up. He said, okay. And I said, all right. And so we walked back in and he was good. And after that, I gave myself a compliment. And I was like, oh, where did that come from? Okay. I like that. And it was just like, just giving myself credit for the work that I had done, that I was actually able to cry with my child, and that I was able to be there and hold space for him. And that was something that was just so, um, it was such a special moment. And I was able to just sit and appreciate how I had shown up in that moment, how different it really was. And that was probably 8, 9 months after I had identified and had been working on that self-critic. And that was a moment where all of a sudden it was like, okay, when did this start happening, that I can give myself a compliment, give myself credit for this? That's actually kind of nice.
Yeah. But you have to look out for those moments, right? Because otherwise they pass
Yes.
by in a flash. Often when I'm coaching people around this subject, I reference the some very brief story. Kids, this is before I left our old home. My husband used to do the breakfast with the kids downstairs. I was getting ready, and then they'd come up to me. I'd get them ready for school, and off we'd go. And every morning, I'd be finishing getting ready, and I would hear this as they come up the stairs, and my bed would be all made nicely, and then they would jump on the bed, and they're having the whale of a time, and I'm like, get off my bloody bed, because I'm bringing all of this, like, you're disrespecting me in my space, all this story into it. And there came the time where I heard the and they came up the stairs, and they started on the bed behind me, and I turned around and smiled at them and carried on doing what I was doing. I was like, oh, I just didn't lose my shit there. Like, did you see that? I didn't just lose my shit. And so I gave myself the little pat on the back, because so often it's it's just over in a flash. And so those moments I love what you said earlier about where you choose to place your attention. What my teacher Scott says, like, the only thing that you have control over is where you place your attention. And so a heightened awareness is a wonderful thing, but you want to be really discerning about where you're placing your attention. And so looking out for those moments is really important. I'd love your perspective on this, because the thing that, when Sam asked you earlier on about, I can't remember how you phrased it, Sam, but where my mind went to was what was really helpful for me. And the thing that I think was really helpful for me was understanding the mechanism of what was actually going on. And what I mean by that is that all of those efforts of essentially being cruel to yourself were not, whilst it was maladaptive, it wasn't with malintent. Actually, what's behind that is protection and trying to, it's like trying to motivate yourself, but in a really unskillful way. And so for me, when I understood why I was behaving the way that I was, why I was talking to myself the way that I was, it really helped with loosening a lot of the the stickiness and being able to open to having a compassionate view towards myself. So I just wonder what are your thoughts on that, and how did that play into your story?
Yeah, that is something that I recognized like around the time that that I had that moment with my son. And I was just like listening to the words, and I was like, oh, that's what you're trying to tell me to do. You're trying to prevent this stuff. Well, you're a real asshole about it. Jesus Christ. Like, oh my God. This is what's been going on all these years. Like it was, oh my goodness. And then you know, my story has so many different layers as well. And that was a moment where when I recognized that, yeah, it was just trying to protect me, right? And set me up so that things wouldn't necessarily go wrong, or I'd learn from it or things like that. But it would just be like, that's what my mind held on to. You know, it was about a year ago. So it was about 6 months later, probably, I learned what my attachment style was. And learning my attachment style, I was able to kind of trace back moments where I saw how it showed up in friendships and like co-working relationships and romantic relationships and family relationships. And I was able to like trace back to like my, quote unquote original wounding, like the values that I was kind of given as a kid. And when I was able to find that, it was like, oh, no wonder that critic was the way that it was. Like, because it reinforces what I was basically, the values that were instilled in me at a young age. But then also, that was the way that it thought that I could protect myself. And when I saw those two things, it was like, oh, now going through and looking back at the past, you can have a different level of understanding that you get to not be as harsh with yourself. And, when you get that understanding, you can see where you were acting from, whether you made a mistake or not. And like, that's the gift that I want to be able to give people, is to be able to go back in the way that they look at the mistakes and the things that they're ashamed of, the things that they feel deep guilt over. And they can see why they made the decisions that they made. Like, it makes sense, not just based on the context of the moment, but it makes sense based on the context of their life and how, like, the things that have happened. And now when you have that understanding, it's like, oh, well, no wonder why I made that decision. Like, this is what I was pretty much thinking from a subconscious level. This is what was acting out. And that it's almost like a deep breath, like, oh, that's where I was acting from. That makes sense. No wonder why I would think that I was such a bad person, things like that. But it's like, okay, yeah, all right. Now that I can see that gives me a lot different of a viewpoint of just my entire life, let alone those moments.
That's like, that's such a doorway to forgiveness, because it speaks to, I call it like a spiritual fact, the fact that everybody's doing what makes sense to them based on their current level of understanding, and everyone's behavior is sane, giving the thinking that looks real to them, right? No matter what we're up to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, knowing that, because it's funny, because shame, I think, often comes from, I've been shown this a few times, and I particularly with plant medicine, I've been shown that, like, it's okay, you can feel the shame, you can alchemize it, you can let it through, but it's based on a lie. And the lie is that you think you could have done anything different than what happened, because all you were doing is what made sense to you. Now, in the alcohol journey, this is huge, because in my experience, what most people want to employ a coach for is to gang up on the alcohol and make the alcohol the bad guy, or make the negative, the kind of critic in the bad guy, right? Without realizing that at the level of understanding we had, a lot of that was literally wisdom in action. So for many people, like, if I were to go back in time, there's no way I'd be prizing alcohol out of teenage Sam's hands, because at the level of understanding I had at the time, it was wisdom in action, because it was helping me try and navigate something that I had no tools for. But then we switched that different level and everything looks different. And the thing that's cool about both of your stories is that shift in understanding, it doesn't always come with like a lightning bolt from God. Oh my God. It's sometimes just, we find ourselves in a situation where we've always done something, and suddenly it occurs to us to do something different. And it's not with effort. We don't have to try. It's not like I need to try and be positive in this one. I need to allow myself to cry with my little lad. It's just, oh, like this is available to me now. And I think I'm personally of the belief that the moment that we stop, that we honor very often that element of it, the wisdom piece, it actually allows us to find freedom from something. And all the time we're trying to attack it and beat it up, we're innocently inflating it. And so I think that's really important. And I love that both of your stories kind of amplify that massive. But I don't know if that makes sense to you, man. I see you nodding along, but it feels true.
Yeah. Yeah, that feels so true. And the way that you laid that out is like, I think that's that missing piece is that we don't understand, right? Is that we don't have the knowledge that that's what we have. Yes. So if you don't know there's something else that's available to you, why would you think that you could act that way, like at the time?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, so breaking it down that way, absolutely, that makes total sense to me. And that's such a compassionate way of looking at shame and the way that you're acting, and, you know, some regrets and things like that, that people, I think you can grasp fairly, like it's an approachable way to be able to grasp, and a great place, no matter where you are, to be able to have that understanding of yourself.
It's also a bit of a, for me, forgiveness. I always used to think that forgiveness was transactional. Like, in order to forgive myself or to forgive someone else, they would need to do this or I would need to do that, right? But actually, for me, forgiveness comes from what we were just talking about. We realize that everybody is up to what makes sense to them. Now, that doesn't mean we have to, I often say, we don't have to stand there and continually get punched in the face, right? If someone's acting from that, we can see that, have compassion for someone, and say, it's not a good idea for me to be here. But that was a big shift in even my understanding of what forgiveness even meant. And I can't, the relief, just the lightness of being in that space is so powerful. And I'm really glad you're talking about this openly, dude, because I think for men as well, in particular, like, and I know everybody's struggling with many of these different things. A lot of people are, but there's a lot of guys that have bottled a lot of shit up. And I know that we have a similar story in terms of how old we were when we stopped drinking in our late 20s. And, you know, the kind of alcohol culture that we'd grown up in, and the kind of things that you learn to like shove everything down as a bloke and just kind of get on with it. And I can imagine in the workforce that you were in, there was a huge amount of that going on and continuing to go on. So it's powerful that you're sharing it, dude. It really is.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And what you're saying about forgiveness too, I felt the same way. And so how do you forgive yourself? And it wasn't until I redefined forgiveness for myself that I was able to finally be able to move on. And there were things that, you know, I told my friend, I don't know if I'll be able to forgive myself for some of the things that I did. And he's like, well, why do you have to?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I guess I really don't, to move on. And I was like, okay. But then I got to this point where I noticed when I started reconnecting, or really just connecting with my body and understanding what was there, and like the energy that I had, like I would notice the chaos and when I was calm and things. I took that and put that onto the meaning of forgiveness for myself, which was I'd been giving so much energy to past events, to things that were done to me, things that I had done, things all in the past. And do I want to leave my energy there? But I want to take it back and use it for what I want to do going forward, and being a better person going forward, being a healthier person, a better dad, better showing up. And when I was able to use forgiveness like that, like I could still hold myself accountable. I could still look at the things that I'd like to improve, but I don't have to give the energy to that moment anymore. That was when it was like, oh, I'm taking this back and using it how I want. And that helped me to forgive some things that I was like, I don't know how to forgive or be able to move on. But it was in that, like you talked about with not standing there and taking it anymore, especially when it comes to how other people may have treated you. But even yourself, like, you don't have to just sit in it, and you can move forward, and it's okay. And that was something that was really important.
It's really powerful.
It is. There's something that I think is kind of important within all of this, in that certainly, like, if I look back at my life from being a very young kid, and then through adolescence and adulthood, I had kind of had this, like, almost like the weight of the world on my shoulders in terms of like a level of responsibility, over responsibility. And the thing that I think that has shifted in the time from going alcohol free is a shift from over responsibility to radical responsibility. And within that forgiveness, so the words that I use for myself, and this is what, like, I think as individuals, it's really helpful what you said right at the beginning about kind of playing with language and finding the way that feels appropriate to talk to yourself. The words that the two words that I always use for myself are, of course, of course, da, 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 da. Of course you would respond like this or whatever. That is my doorway to forgiveness. And where the radical responsibility comes in, which is what you were just talking about, is like, it doesn't end there. It's not like, oh, of course, and then I'm going to kind of sit in this like well of self-pity. It's like, of course, like, I'm recognizing my humanness, and it's like this opening to, and this is what I'm going to do or not do about it. So, I think, oh God, I was about to say years ago, Sam, we did an episode about radical responsibility. It might be a nice theme to wheel out again and to do a new episode on. Because that for me was such a big shift, because responsibility is really important to me, and having agency, but not taking responsibility in such a way that it's undermining, and that I'm kind of extending myself with this illusion of like what I am and I am not responsible for.
Yes. And that kind of reminds me, or brings me back to kind of what Sam said earlier too, about just like shoving things down into the side. Like, I took responsibility for everybody else, like not just myself, but like everybody else that was around me, like their feelings, how they were showing up, their actions and everything else. And like, I internalized all of that. And so I wouldn't talk about anything that was going on with me. So if I needed help, or I needed support, or if I had a need, I didn't talk to anyone about what that was. And to the point where I didn't know any of my needs. And that's been another journey in trying to figure out, how do I put words to needs? Like, I can feel that there's a need, but I don't necessarily know or have the words to be able to get to it, to the point where when I told my dad about my ex-wife and I getting a divorce, it was a month before we were moving out. And he goes, well, how long has this been going on? And I said, 3 years. And he goes, I didn't even know anything was wrong. And my response to him, which was really dickish of me, but my response was, well, you raised me well, didn't you? And I was like, looking back on it, it's like, that's a dig. But at the same time, that is how I was raised, was take care of shit yourself.
Yeah.
Don't talk about your problems or anything. And like, that's changing that mindset, that you can talk about the things that hurt in a way that you're keeping the responsibility, right, of how you're showing up, but you're also letting it know that, hey, this sucks, this hurts, I have a need here that I would like filled. I have a want here in how we could possibly show up and be different. But yeah, that responsibility that you're talking about, that, yeah, of course I wouldn't share what's going on in my life, because I was never able to before. Why would it be different now? And now I have started to open that dialogue more and we can share more. But it really took intentionally doing what you're talking about, Ellie, and taking that radical responsibility on myself of, well, if I want different, it starts with me. I need to show up different. And what does that look like? And how can I do that in a way that is true to me, but it's not necessarily just jumping in with both feet in certain circumstances. And so being able to identify and find some language and then show up in a way that is true to myself and how I want to be, but may not be acting from the place of hurt that I may have been previously. Right.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Like one thing that I've uncovered that's been a game changer for me is, it was unconscious, but so many of the ways I used to kind of get at myself or tell myself off or all those things were, as you said, man, just me trying to stop myself from repeating that thing or whatever it might be. But then we end up in that moment where we keep hitting the fuck it button because who wants to carry a whole bunch of non-forgiveness? Like, it feels yucky. But the thing that I didn't know and I didn't get the memo about, and I think most people don't know, is that the most powerful thing in this world is love, wisdom, peace, clarity, all the things that are the real you beneath all of it. In the light of your awareness, like that's who you are. And that space, you can build businesses from that space. You can let things go from, like, there's nothing you can't do. And I think a lot of people, they think, in order to accomplish X, I need to use pressure, self-recrimination, da 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 da. And it's not conscious, but it's mapped out that way, and it looks real. It looks like reality. But to uncover the truth that hanging out in beautiful feelings is not only lovely and a lot nicer than carrying all the weight around, but it's actually an incredible way of creating beautiful things in your life. And so many of the things that we thought we needed, stress, pressure, or whatever, anxiety, all this stuff, they're surplus to requirements. They're not actually the things that we need. And that is a message that we just don't hear. That we don't hear the power of we don't hear how powerful we are. We don't know that because we've innocently not heard that, or we've lost touch with that. But to start living life from that space is amazing. If there's one thing I know about you, man, it's just like how full of joy and love, and just how much warmth there is in you. Like it's so much fun hanging out with you, man. And yeah, I mean, I'm just so pleased that you've connected with that space and continue to do so. It's magic.
Yeah, this is, right back at you, to be able to be in a space where you're not scared of feelings, period, let alone the good ones. I think so much of our lives we're kind of in those icky feelings, so we think that's where we're supposed to be. So you can learn to fear those good ones that you're talking about, right?
Oh yeah.
And so when you can embrace those and be a part of it, like a few years ago, like you'd have been too bubbly for me, dude. Like I would have been like, yeah. It's like I can't be like, I'm just uncomfortable being around so much pleasantness. Like, but now it's, I am that pleasantness, and it's like sometimes I'm like, am I full of shit? And I have to sit there and think about it. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not full of shit. It's okay. Like it's okay to be that person. And it's just, it is incredible to see people realize, like, there's that saying that when you're your authentic self, you give other people permission to be their authentic selves.
Yeah.
And so when you see that and you start to feel it, it is so powerful to sit there. So
that's beautiful, dude. We've nearly been talking for an hour. I don't know how that happened. So I think we're at the point where, like, I have no doubt that people will want to know what you're up to and like all the amazing things you're doing, bro. And so where do you want to direct people to? Where can people find you and all that kind of stuff?
If, all social media platforms, if you look up Untapped Keg, one word, like a keg that's in the corner that's not tapped, Untapped Keg. That's the podcast. If you go to untappedkeg.com, you can find info about coaching, some of that good stuff. But just sharing, right, the messages that it's okay to not be okay. And even if people around you don't allow you to not be okay, know that that's probably a space that you should not be in. And it really is okay to not be okay. And so if you can find a space where you're allowed to not be okay, like that's so powerful. So learning what to do in those moments. But yeah, so Untapped Keg, I share daily, like little things from my journey, that little tips. I try to keep it under a minute for YouTube shorts. Thanks, YouTube. But I also am doing, if you're in the Virginia area of the United States, I started a non-alcoholic events company. And so if you go on there, you'll see when we're kind of doing some events, which can look like a storytelling, entertainment kind of event. We have coffee meetups, happy hours, kind of like just hangouts. So if you want to, whether you drink or not, if you want to take a night off, or if you want a good tasting mocktail or NA beer, you can find the events that we're at. That's called Free Life. If you go to Instagram, it's Free Life LLC. And you can find out about our events that we're doing there. But just I've successfully been able to move across the country, build a community I didn't have any family here or anything, got divorced, like built from scratch this community. And it was through what ended up turning into this company, Free Life, that I've been able to build this community. So trying to give that back to people in the local area is really what I'm trying to do, is create a place where they can also build the community that they're looking for.
I fucking love that, because going back to what you just said a little while ago, like that, that I was talking about this to a bunch of people yesterday. Somebody said to me, it's really hard to find people. So what they were talking about was when you go alcohol free, and then you have kind of this reckoning with some of the old relationships, the relationships in your life.
Yes,
it's really hard to find effectively like new people. This is our good friend Barry that I was talking to. And I said to Barry, first of all, because he's now a certified coach, I said, you need to go back and listen to this and listen to all of your limiting beliefs, because you say, oh, it's a struggle and it's this, that, and the other. And I was kind of being playful with him. But I do understand why people feel that. And what I asked him to do was go away and think of a new word that he could refer to it as. So it's no longer, he's carrying it around as this struggle. Because actually, the opportunity to find new relationships is, I mean, it's one of the best things. I think, when you have a new level of discernment, and I was referencing kind of like the main people in my life, and some of which I've either not physically met, or I've only met a handful of times, including Sam. But yet the depth of relationship, the kinds of things that you'll talk about, the places that you'll go together, and I don't necessarily mean physically, but the places that you go, it's wild. And then what you share when you are together, whether it's virtually or physically, to be able to show up 100% as you are, with the permission of everybody else to show up exactly as they are, it's the most freeing, joyful, wonderful thing. So I love that you're putting so much effort and love into creating spaces and places for people to physically get together, because as we know, the physically getting together is really fucking cool. And then you get to go to places like that place that we went on our last day and eat loads of donuts, which was just wonderful.
It wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about.
Are you still on that sugar high, Sam? Because that was a lot of sugar.
Yeah, I was still shaking. Well, it wasn't my fault. I accidentally ordered like 2 extras or something,
Oh, that was and I don't know if I told you this, but that at Tampa, that was the first time I saw Lenny in person.
What was it?
And yeah, and that was when these relationships that you craft, and a lot of people talk about those digital relationships, they are real. And even though they're happening over a device or things like that, like you can, with, like you were saying, Ellie, with the depth that you create, then you know, if you're ever lucky enough to meet, and so far I've been lucky enough to meet all of my friends that I've really met. There's only a handful that I haven't. Like when you meet in person, it just carries over, and it's like you've been in the same room with that person for so long, and it's, I think, getting over that obstacle that maybe we place there. Like if it's online, there's something lesser about it, but it's just, it can be a part of the friendship and the group and the support that you find and you're able to create for yourself. And so I really like the way you frame that, Ellie. I appreciate you sharing that.
That sounds like a really beautiful place to pause it. But before we do, I need you to show anybody who's watching on YouTube what that awesome piece of equipment is behind.
Oh yeah.
So this is my proton pack from Ghostbusters, and it's made by Hasbro, based on the newer movie, not the newest, but the one before, Afterlife. Movie sound effects and lights up. It's pretty amazing. I can actually turn it on from the wand like they do in the movies. It's so amazing, and my kids know that I love it, so they know not to touch it if I'm not up here. But they asked me what it does, and I said it sucks up ghosts. And so they came upstairs and they're like, I want to suck up ghosts. Let's go suck up ghosts. So I turned it on. They're like, how does it suck? And I'm like, you got to use your imagination. They're like, it doesn't really work. What's the point of it, Dad? And they haven't been up to touch it since. And it's been like a month and a half.
Oh, their kids are so funny, man. Oh, dude, thanks so much for coming on and bringing your energy to the show, man. And yeah, we'd love to have you back on to talk about other aspects of your journey and stuff that you're seeing. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. This is a blast. I love hanging out with you too. And so anytime.
Awesome, dude.
Huge love. Thank you so much, RJ.